Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me once again for Story Time with Joyce. And I'm reading from my book, Betty, which is the first book in my Big City Dreams series. Last week, we read the chapter, Just Breathe. And that's because Betty was having a baby. So we read about her having the baby. And we ended the chapter with Dr. Russell, who she works for. He stopped by and brought some things for the new apartment and to see the new baby. And he's going to be picking up Betty and little baby Ruth to go to work so they don't have to take the streetcar. So let's go on and read this. This chapter is called Betty's Juice Joint. That's kind of a fun title. Let's see what that is. Dr. Russell left and Betty started preparing something for dinner. Ruth was still sleeping, so she finished setting the table. Betty was just pulling the bread out of the oven when Arvin got home. She greeted him and said, "Arvin, Ruth is sleeping and dinner is ready, so if you want a quiet meal, clean up and come to the table right away." "Just give me a couple minutes," he said. "It's been a hard day, and working at the factory really isn't turning out like I thought my city dream would. I talked to a couple of guys, and we may want to be starting something on our own." "What?" Betty said. "Well, don't really know yet. Just heard these guys talking about stuff." "What stuff?" "Don't know yet. I'll be talking to them guys later," Arvin answered, somewhat annoyed that Betty was questioning him. "Well, be careful, Arvin. Don't be getting yourself into something that could cause you or us some trouble." Even more annoyed now by Betty's response, he said with a slight sarcastic tone, "Betty, you worry too much. You just take care of women's business and let me take care of man's business." Betty responded with a sarcastic tone of her own. "If you say so, Arvin." Then she continued with a softer tone. "Dr. Russell came by today. I go to work for him on Tuesday. I'll only be working 3 days a week, though." "What? Why?" "Well, his schedule changed at the hospital. He came by to bring us some towels and some sheets." "Why would he do that?" "He had asked me what we needed for our new place, so I told him sheets and towels." "I don't know, Betty. You're getting mighty personal with him. I don't like it. You're his worker, what do you call it? You're his domestic help," Arvin said with that tone again. "Dr. Russell considered me part of his family. After all, I've been with those twins for over 4 years now. Since we moved closer to his place, he's going to pick Ruth and me up so we don't have to take the streetcar." "I think he looks at you different than family." "Arvin, stop. Since when are you jealous? Like you said, you take care of man's business and I'll take care of woman's business, and this is woman's business. Enough of this talk now. Let's eat," Betty said sternly. Betty and Arvin ate mostly in silence, with the only interruptions being Arvin's under-his-breath comments about Dr. Russell's intentions. Betty just ignored his grumblings. Betty started back to work with Dr. Russell. The next 2 years went by so quickly. Ruth was getting bigger and loved to go to work with Mommy. The twins, Cora and Tommy, would play with her when they got home from school. Betty did feel like part of the family more each day. When Dr. Russell got home, he would sit down with Betty and have a cup of her tea and tell her all about the patients he helped that day. Betty looked forward to those times. Arvin really didn't talk to her about his day or much at all. One afternoon when Dr. Russell got home and they were sitting with their tea, he started to tell Betty that the country was preparing to go dry and no more alcohol. She asked why our country would do that, although she really didn't have an opinion on it one way or the other. He said there were many reasons for prohibiting alcohol. However, since it was getting late, decided to put off any further conversation about that until the following week. It was time to get Betty and Ruth home. He realized he looked forward to their tea and conversation time together a little too much. It felt good to come home to sit and share his day with someone. However, this was the wrong someone. In January 1920, the ratification of the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution went into effect, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquor, which ushered in a period in American history known as Prohibition. The increase of illegal production and sale of liquor, known as bootlegging, and the proliferation of speakeasies, illegal drinking spots, was the result. The experiment was introduced due to the natural mood in America. When America entered the war of 1917, the national mood also turned against drinking alcohol. It was believed that a ban on alcohol would boost supplies of important grains, such as barley. The religious sect believed that the consumption of alcohol went against God's will. And finally, alcohol, while the country's young men were at war, they didn't feel that was good, that we could have a good time with alcohol while our men were fighting in the war. By law, any wine or spirits Americans had stashed away in January 1920 were theirs to keep and enjoy in the privacy of their homes. This amounted to only a few bottles. But some of the affluent drinkers built huge wine cellars and even brought out whole liquor store inventories. Drugstores were allowed to sell medicinal whiskey for everything from toothaches to the flu. With a physician's prescription, patients could legally buy a pint of hard liquor every 10 days. The pharmaceutical booze often came with seemingly laughable doctor's orders, such as take 3 ounces every hour for stimulant until stimulated. Many speakeasies eventually operated under the guise of being pharmacies, and legitimate chains flourished. The people who illegally made, imported, and sold alcohol during this time were called bootleggers. Arvin and his buddies had been stopping off for a few beers after work, and now they had come to an end. Needless to say, they were none too happy. They had been discussing what they would do when that day came. The Prohibition movement's strength had grown due to the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Their discussions included how they were going to capitalize on this new situation and where they were going to get their beer. Of course, Arvin had one of his city dream ideas. He would wheel, deal, and profit from this situation. One evening when Arvin got home, he said in a very loud, excited voice, "Betty, I need to talk with you before we eat." "Okay, sounds serious," Betty answered. "Yes, it is. You know, since we can't buy beer no more, the guys and me have been talking." Betty interrupted and said, "Is this some of that man's business you've been talking about?" "Betty, now listen. Each of us is going to brew beer and sell it," Arvin said emphatically. "What?" Betty almost screamed, then lowered her voice as not to upset Ruth and continued, "Brew beer? That's going to get us into jail." "Stop," Arvin said loudly, stamping his foot. "People are going to want to buy beer and drink it at home, aren't they? This is a good time to make some extra money," Arvin said more calmly. "Arvin, how are you going to make beer when you go to work all day?" Betty said, a little bit more composed as well. "Well, I thought you could make it the days you aren't with the twins. And since you aren't working as much, we could use the extra money." "What? How am I going to make it here in our place? This isn't Kentucky. Back home, people had stills, and the stills were big. Big pots, a couple of big pots. All we need is some grain, malt, syrup, hops, and yeast." "Arvin, you're not thinking straight. This is a crazy idea. It's against the law. We could go to jail." "What about Ruth? Is this part of your city dreams?" Betty said, all in one breath. "Betty, stop being so difficult. Lots of people are going to be doing this. It'll be exciting." "Pshaw," Betty said, waving her hand, dismissing what Arvin was saying. Mother's in the kitchen, washing out the jugs. Sister's in the pantry, bottling the suds. Father's in the cellar, mixing up the hops. Johnny's on the front porch, watching for the cops. This is a poem written by a New York State Rotary Club member during Prohibition, which seemed to sum up the climate in Chicago during the first 18 months of Prohibition. We're going to stop here, and next week we're going to pick up and see if Betty's really going to brew some beer. Have a great week. See you next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Coast Time. You can pick up a copy of Betty on Amazon.com. Look for Betty by Joyce Bennett-Hall, or you can go to my website, joycebennetthall.com. Thanks. Bye.